Hello, this is Team 10, and for our final project, we have chosen to study agricultural runoff. First, the big picture is water pollution in general. We need to just talk about why water pollution is important and what factors influence water pollution and where they come from. So some factors that can influence water pollution are climate. An increased temperature in climate can have thermal water pollution, where the water can get too hot for a water environment and can mess up the ecosystem there. Altitude also affects water quality and water pollution. This is just due to particulate matter and how much oxygen is up when you're higher in the altitude versus lower in the altitude. Soil composition. This is very important because you don't know what chemicals are in the soil. It could be phosphorus, nitrogen. You don't know what other man-made products are in the soil. So if that were to get into water, that could affect the water quality as well as what would happen. For vegetation cover, that can also affect it because it can help limit the amount of precipitation that directly falls into the water, as well as shading the area from a lot of water getting dumped into the stream or river. Percolation, which is groundwater movement, or like water moving in between underneath the soil. Sometimes that can lead directly into a river or stream. So the amount of water that percolates through the soil can also be influenced by precipitation as well. Some sources are industries where they can dump their waste into water and not have any consequences. Municipal wastewater as well, that comes from your own home or any public facility. Mining, any sort of mining can have whatever they are mining fall into the water as well as urban development that has to deal with construction and can inhibit the natural flow of the water, which can hurt the water environment. Agriculture, which is what we are studying, that has to deal with pesticides or excess nitrogen or phosphorus. But the main one is a non-point source. That is where most water pollution comes from. Some water data just to wrap your head around how much we're talking about. There are groundwater reserves that have 70 million cubic kilometers worth of water, but the global demand annually is 6,000 to 7,000 cubic kilometers. So a lot of water demand, but the groundwater reserves are pretty big, but they continue to shrink due to how much water we are extracting without replacing. In terms of how many people are affected by water pollution, about 14,000 people die every day, which is pretty sad and pretty devastating because not a lot of people have access to fresh water. And then lastly, 38% of the European Union water bodies are under pressure from non-point sources. And you might be wondering, what is a non-point source? Well, we're going to go over that now. So a point source is an identifiable source where water is coming from. That can be like a ditch, a pipe, factory, storm drain, sewage treatment plants. You can identify where this water is coming from and potentially understand what is in that water because you know where it's coming from. A non-point source, you really can't find a pinpoint where it's coming from. So pesticides, fertilizers, industrial waste, you can't figure out where it's coming from, and you can't figure out what is in the water. that's contaminating the water that you're studying. Lastly, to tie it back into agricultural runoff, some agricultural pollutants are fertilizers, pesticides, and eroded soils. We talked about that earlier when the factors contributing to water pollution. After rain or flooding, pollutants are carried to water bodies. After a big rain, water flow can increase in a stream, which will then carry the water pollutant much farther than it would in a much faster rate as well. So it's very hard after a rain to figure out where and how much pollutants entered the water body. Phosphates and nitrogen are in fertilizers and can be introduced through fertilizers. Phosphates promote algae growth, which reduce dissolved oxygen in water. That can harm a water ecosystem because plants need dissolved oxygen in order to grow, as well as other fish, maybe they need dissolved oxygen in order to live. Nitrogen fertilizers have a high water solubility, and that means that it's really easy to leach from the soil and contribute to agricultural runoff. So you don't know that it's already there until it's much too late. But both of these can lead to eutrophication. And 661 million pounds of pesticides were used in 1976 by farmers. Even though this is an old year that this statistic is coming from, that number has increased since 1976, almost every single year. So it is very difficult to say how much we are using every year because it continues to increase. Your quiz will test you on these questions. So we can go and take a look at those. So quiz 1, in 2017, what was the annual global requirement of water? About how many people die from water pollution related issues? And what is the main and leading source of water pollution in the US? So those are your 3 questions for your quiz. Make sure to answer those, and yeah.